Brendan Morrison from Chalet Road. I have a follow-up question on the proposed Amendment 6. You're not going to eliminate the 3-acre, 220-foot.
No.
So if I'm a developer and I come into the planning board and said, here are my boxes that I want to do, I have the right to do that, and by law, I can go ahead and do it. So, but you're saying Amendment 6, you're going to say to the developer, oh gee, why don't we make some changes? Why don't you cooperate with us, because we'd like to have that stone wall preserved. And I agree, I'd like to have it preserved, but legally,
Number 6
Aren't
has
you-
nothing to do with workforce housing.
no, I'm not talking about workforce.
And
I'm talking about the developer who comes in and says, I've got 3 cookie cutter lots here. 3 acres, 220 feet, Hale Road, and I want to put in 3 houses, let's say.
If he could do it with the cookie cutter lots, he can still do it with this one, but just by moving things.
But I don't have to.
Correct.
Correct? So
This just allows,
this
this allows
proposal
the
is just
developer.
allowing you to ask
Yes,
to make changes.
In the past, if you wanted to say, geez, I'd like to give this guy a stone wall and this guy a stream,
Yeah.
we'd have to say, I'm sorry, sir, but the town passed an ordinance
Okay.
that requires that every lot
That's what you
be.
need to clarify here.
Yeah.
I mean, I spent on the planning board in Massachusetts, and this was always coming up at the meeting, that we'd like to see something a little different than what they're proposing.
Then vote for this.
And so this is allowing you to talk to the developer. So I think it's a good opening solvent. Thanks.
Mr. Moderator, could I add one point, Mr. Moderator?
Sure.
The previous question, Evelyn did a very good job of giving you an answer, but I want to make it very, very clear to everyone. If a conventional, what we're characterizing as a cookie cutter approach to land subdivision would give you, under the zoning ordinance, let's say it's 3 acres and 220 feet of frontage, with a conventional approach to subdivision, let's say a hypothetical here, that you would get 9 lots with a conventional 3 acres, 220 feet of frontage. Once you determine what that lot count is with a conventional, if you want to do something more sensitive to where the stone walls are, the streams, the woodland edges, and so on, you would have the same, the board would have the flexibility to say, okay, you've established the magic number of 9 lots. You can still do 9 lots, but some of them can be smaller than the 3 acres that's required in that zone. Some of them can have 187.5 feet because that's the distance between that stone wall and this stone wall. But the number will still be 9 lots. You tell us what the number is with a conventional approach, and if you would like to do something with a little bit more flexibility, the board now has that flexibility to say, okay, we'll do 9 lots, but in a different configuration that is more sensitive to the rural characteristics of the property. And the other point is that there is a maximum change of 50%. The board had to draw some type of a guideline saying we will not go below a certain percentage. In other words, if the zone that you're in is 3 acres with 220 feet of frontage, using that example, we're not going to have 1 lot because the 2 stone walls are very, very close together. What used to be a cow pathway to get back up to the dairy barn, and those are only 20 feet apart. So we're not going to allow a lot that's 20 feet just because of the stone walls. We will modify it, but we have limits of flexibility, and that limit is 50%. So the smallest, in that example, the smallest road frontage that you would be allowed would be 50% of whatever that zone happens to require. In this case, 220 feet. The board could go down to 110 feet, but that's as far as they can go with their flexibility. I just want to mention that there's a 50% limitation on lot size or road frontage.
Is that in the amendment?
It's in the detail, it's in the proposal that's been on file at the town office and at the clerk's office. The wordings that you see here, in those cases where it says it is available for view at the planning office or the town office, clerk's office, the actual wording has a little bit more detail to it. This is a summary of that. Ma'am?
Yes, Peggy Graham, New Hampton Road. I was looking at your stock analysis, and it's showing that we're 72% affordable housing in Sanborton. Well, that's much more than the 51%. One of the things that the Daily Sun had a report that from Plymouth, they said that I'm moving around, and yes, we are an aging population, and the workforce is decreasing in New Hampshire. Therefore, I'm not worried about being sued for workforce housing in the future anytime soon. Is that a consideration at all? Yes, and are we compliant with 72%? We're not?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, just other people know, this is not much, if not more than I, but this is one of those situations where there isn't a true test of black and white, compliant, non-compliant. As I think the attorney was trying to say, this is all intended, it's at the mercy of a developer, or somebody comes in and says, well, I can't do what I need to do under this workforce housing thing, and then it's at the mercy of a judge, okay? We do have some inexpensive housing, but a developer's going to want to build new stuff, and he has, under the legislation, he has the right to come in and try to do that. The other thing is this whole, we don't have the rental housing, okay? Everything here does, in fact, Jody, the only workforce housing incentives, the only workforce housing bonuses, the only things in here that make workforce housing different than your house and my house and anybody else's house is, number one, that the multi-family thing, as you were talking about, and the fact that the law says it has to be available throughout 50% of the
Not
town.
multi-family.
No.
No, it doesn't.
Multi-family.
It
But the
doesn't.
workforce housing does.
Workforce,
Workforce
single-family home valued under 240 is workforce housing.
And the only incentive, the only thing that a workforce housing project gets that you and I don't get without workforce housing is that additional 10% bonus in a cluster zone situation.
We're just saying scale it back, instead of scaling it back.
If somebody can get 15, like Mark was saying, if somebody can get, is going to be able under this workforce thing, Mark, to get 15 houses in there, that means that 15 houses is only going to be 10% more than what he can get in there today. Because workforce housing, as far as density, as far as number of homes, number of living units, the only thing that we're providing here, unlike a lot of towns which give out 30% bonuses and much larger bonuses, we're only going to allow workforce housing development a 10% additional bonus, and only within a cluster zone. So that's single-family houses in a cluster or multi-family in a cluster, if that were that.
Does everyone have one?
One of the things that I wanted to answer the gentleman, everyone feels that we could do an analysis of the town and come up with a figure that would show we already have sufficient. And even if we did that, there's no place to take it to say we have sufficient housing. It's not relevant until you get sued and get taken to court. Then you can use it in a courtroom, an up-to-date figure. And it isn't what we are, the term for is fair share, they keep putting in, we need to do our fair share. There is no figure that says what our fair share is. And it is not our fair share of just Sanborton. We are part of a region, and it's your town's fair share of that region as well. And we could have spent a whole year working to put those figures together, and they mean nothing unless we have a developer come in and take us to court, because those figures can be used by a judge. But there is no place you can take those figures prior to going to court and say, do I have my fair share? There's no figure out there that says what our fair share is. There's no entity out there for us to take our fair share to. So it is meaningless until you get taken to court. It's not relevant until then. Now, we've always in the town, and I've been on this board for 30 years, we've always had to be held to, we were supposed to have our fair share of low-income housing. And we never had to go do an in-depth study. We always knew that we had it. You look at the figures in this town, I would agree with you. If there was a figure out there that said what our town had to have, we'd probably need it. But it's useless, there's no one to show it to. The other thing, when we're talking about developers coming in, we as a board have tried to put together something that would show that we are trying to make sure we don't have any rocks in the road. To me, that was what we owed the community, was to make sure that we didn't get taken to court because of something we had failed to do properly or didn't have properly in what we have here. Because once someone comes into our board and says, I am applying to do workforce housing, and you do have to do that, you may put up a house that would meet the workforce housing figure, but it isn't called workforce housing unless you declare it when you first come before our board. They can do that. It isn't going to, if we get taken to court, it isn't going to be based on, oh, you don't have enough in the town. It's going to be based on what we do or do not have in our regulations. That's what we will get taken to court on. And so we want to make sure that there is nothing there. And I asked this as a quick question tonight as we came through the door. We all know about towns that have gotten taken to court because of something like that. Does anyone in this room know of a case that got taken to court and they won because they proved they had their fair share?
You know of any that lost?
Have they lost?
You know of any that lost?
Yes.
What town?
He said, do you know of any town that took them to court that the developer did not win the case?
Right, I'm asking, does she know of any that lost?
I don't know of any that have gone through the system, no reported case up to this, excuse me, let me stand up. No reported case that I know of has gone to the Supreme Court yet. I don't know of any at the Superior Court level. One thing that I wanted to make comment on, the workforce housing provisions of the statute make sure that the environmental issues, in the statute when it says environmental, think septic and wetlands, traffic, fire, and life safety provisions have to still be met. It's not that everything turns a blind eye. In James Frankenstein story, you know, it would be for those 5 units, so 15 units, that land would have to support a commercial septic system to support all of those.
That means more taxes.
That is an incredibly expensive process that we aren't in charge of. DES is in charge of. Okay? Has to have water located and pulled enough for those units. So that is a disincentive that we are not in charge of. That certain lands, not all lands are going to be able to pull that. Okay? And just because they come in, as Evelyn correctly says, they have to say the magic word coming in the door. I'm here with a workforce housing application. They can't decide it 2.5 meetings later. So they come in the door, everybody kind of does a freeze. And then you decide, okay, what are the things we have to do for this one?
There are 2 cases, by the way.
This gentleman has been waiting a long time.
That's the Ossipee case that I mentioned,
Can I ask you a question?
the window case.
There are 2 cases here.
Croc TV.